Atlantis, a lost world swallowed in a single day and night. Plato described it as an advanced civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a society of immense power suddenly drowned beneath the sea over 11,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. Egyptian temple records speak of a primeval island consumed by flood and darkness. Across the world, from India to the Americas, ancient narratives remember civilizations swept away by cataclysm. Could these myths be fragments of memory from humanity's forgotten past? To explore these mysteries, we turn to Ancient Civilizations, a Gaia original series that challenges what we've been taught and what we've forgotten.
When people hear about Atlantis, many are familiar with Plato and the work that he had connected to the Timaeus and Critias and descriptions left behind. But many aren't aware that there were other Greek philosophers that knew incredible details of Atlantis, such as Diodorus. Now, the reason why there are other individuals that knew this information was that Plato was not the one who was told this from the temple priests of Sais. Solon actually told Socrates, as well as other Greek philosophers, which is why the story has to come from multiple people and not one single source. When we combine the information from Diodorus along with Plato, what we have is a cohesive narrative that connects with a very specific time period that Atlantis was described as being destroyed 11,600 years ago. Now, that time period matches up not only when Plato was alive and existed, telling his story, but matches up with ice core samples and geologic evidence from the Atlantic Ocean basin of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge that, if we compare ancient records, show us that there were incredible catastrophes going on at this exact time period that's described by Plato and Diodorus for the destruction of Atlantis, matching both the descriptions of its location as well as the time period that was causing widespread destruction all across the earth more than 11,000 years ago.
In their descriptions, Plato and Diodorus are emphatic that Atlantis was originally a very pious or righteous civilization. The emphasis was on their connection with the gods, that the Atlanteans themselves were considered to be hybrid beings. They were part human, part divine. They were demigods, and they had been warned, especially by Zeus, that as long as they adhered to their spiritual beliefs and maintained their piousness and righteousness, that everything was going to be fine with Atlantis. But of course, as Plato tells the story, they wavered from that, and Atlantis then begins this long decline into darkness that culminates with the total destruction of their civilization in a single day and a single night.
Tales of Atlantis were prevalent in ancient Greece. But as with any civilization that is destroyed by cataclysm, the evidence to prove the exact location has been much harder to find.
Plato tells us that the main island was closer to the actual opposite continent that he refers to, which I would take to be the Americas. And all the indications are that it was some distance out. And we can say this because he says that where the sunken land of Atlantis was now these mud shoals, in other words, very shallow areas of sea that a vessel could very easily get, grounded on this mud. Now, various other ancient writers contemporary to Plato also talk about these mud shoals. And they add something very vital about them, and that's the fact that this area was also covered in seaweed. And this tells us that we are dealing with the Sargasso Sea, a massive area between the Azores and the Bahamas, quite literally covered in seaweed.
When I started to research Atlantis, and I started looking at it from a scientific point of view, the geography and the geology, and saying, okay, is it plausible what Plato recorded? And when you look especially into the mid-Atlantic and all of the geology and everything that's going on there, it is actually plausible. It's not impossible. It was claimed in like the 1960s, they sort of did a scan of the ocean floor and they said, no, there's There's no lost continent there. And so people kind of took that and went, okay, and they started looking for Atlantis in other places, which then made the whole Atlantis search kind of a joke, because you could go, oh, maybe it was here, maybe it was in Australia, maybe it was in Antarctica. And people stopped looking in the original place that Plato said it was. But if we refocus back to that whole area and look at what went down, it turns out that, yes, the middle of the Atlantic ridge is an extremely volatile area. It's on this sort of trifactor of 3 plates. They all meet right at the Azores. It's this incredibly delicate place. And if any natural global catastrophe was going to happen, I would not want to be there, because it's the place that if any island was going to sink, it would be there.
In 1882, American congressman and writer Ignatius L. Donnelly published the book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, in which he presented evidence to show that a sophisticated civilization known as Atlantis had once existed and was destroyed from the same event in the Bible known as the Great Flood. He based this theory on both Plato's descriptions of Atlantis and the date of its destruction.
Ignatius Donnelly was a congressman from Minnesota who ran for Congress as much with the motive in mind that he could get access to the Library of Congress. And he spent a lot of his time researching Atlantis.
And he actually wrote a book where he puts lots of ideas into it, lots of speculation about what Atlantis really was, how it influenced the world, what these people were doing at this time, what technologies they had, and how it even influenced other cultures like Egypt and Mexico and other places around the world.
Ignatius Donnelly is really important to the whole modern story of Atlantis. So he wrote this book basically theorizing that Plato, he was actually talking about something real. It wasn't made up and fiction. And that really took off, and everybody suddenly started to get interested in Atlantis and suddenly started looking for Atlantis, and it became really fashionable to look for Atlantis from the 1880s onwards.
And his ideas have really kind of stuck in the consciousness of many people. And a lot of people go along with what he said as well as what Plato said and other early writers. It's the fact that Atlantis was a genuine landmass that got destroyed in a cataclysm and sunk beneath the Atlantic Ocean.
But now Ignatius Donnelly saw that there was evidence for great catastrophes during that epoch, and his trigger for these catastrophes was a comet impact. So in that respect, I think he was way ahead of his time.
And some people say that Ignatius Donnelly was the godfather of alternative history. He's the first one that really started wait, maybe we could look at something through a different lens, or maybe these myths and legends and laws have some kernel of truth in them. Let's look for it.
As the prophetic tales of this once great civilization were woven through lore and legend, alternative researchers were ignited by the wisdom and accuracy of the dating given by the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce, when a compilation of excerpts from his earlier readings called Edgar Cayce on Atlantis was published in 1968.
Edgar Cayce is arguably America's most famous psychic. He was known as the sleeping prophet. As these readings were taking place, he would often see past lives of this particular person standing or sitting in front of them. And this could include information about lives in Atlantis. He was able to flesh out areas that Plato had never got to. He talked in terms of their technology, for instance, crystal technology, and the different experiments they were doing, the different temples that they were constructing for energy healing. But he also then talks about the destruction of Atlantis. He said it took place over a period of time, beginning around 50,000 years ago and ending around 10,500 BC. So that's slightly earlier than Plato's 9,600 BC, but in the same ballpark, essentially. And what he said was that the final remnant of Atlantis was in the area of the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and that this is where we should look for any evidence of it rising again, quite literally. And he said, look for this in 1968 or 1969, not too far away, which it wasn't, it was just a couple of decades away. And indeed, what happened at this very time, 1968 and 1969, was the discovery of this incredible archaeological feature off of the coast of North Island in the islands of Bimini in the Bahamas.
Edgar Cayce said of Atlantis, it stretched all the way virtually to Europe. And he actually said Bimini was an area where it was like the mountaintop area, which was still now above the water level. And since then, the Bimini Road has been found, these huge underwater megalithic pavements or roads going throughout the whole area there. And so his predictions came true in that respect. He also said the Hall of Records was originally in Atlantis, ended up in places like Egypt, the Bahamas, in the Yucatan of Mexico, and so on and so forth.
Throughout history, several writers and mystics have stated that the area of the Caribbean has the remnants of the once powerful Atlantean Empire. From Plato to Cayce and Churchward, there are tales from a time when a great empire in the Atlantic Ocean was destroyed. As the relics of the Maya, Inca, and Olmec are strategically placed throughout the Yucatan Peninsula, recent discoveries on the ocean floor near Cuba create new questions about the origins of these influential civilizations. Was this area home to an ancient civilization before the fires and floods of the Younger Dryas period?
In recent years, technology now has allowed us to peer deep below the levels of the ocean in ways that we haven't been able to do in the past. And what scientists are finding, what's being revealed, is that what we once believed was virgin ocean floor obviously has been above sea level in times past, and not just a little bit. It has been above sea level to the point where massive cities and huge population centers existed before the sea levels rose and covered them, in some cases, over 2,000 feet below the surface of the ocean, such as we're seeing off the coast of Cuba. It was discovered only recently. Off the coast of India, the Gulf of Kambat, 9,500 years before present, is now being dated a massive city, 3 miles long, 5 miles wide, believed now to be one of the sacred cities described in Mahabharata that was believed to be a fairy tale, until side-scan sonar was able to reveal the existence of the walls of this city. And now the controversy is, what does all of this mean? We're seeing cities off the coast of Japan, we're seeing them in the Atlantic, we're seeing them off the coast of Cuba. These anomalies are now becoming the news story.
In 2001, marine engineers Paulina Zelitsky and Paul Weinsweig led an expedition off the western tip of Cuba's Pinar del Rio province. What they discovered, over 2,000 feet below the surface, shocked the world.
There was a ship that was basically doing sonar experiments off the northwestern coast of Cuba, and they were initially looking for shipwrecks, looking for deposits of oil to, help the economy of the Cuban government. That was it, nothing more. And then one day, they were completely shocked when the sonar bounces off the seabed about 2,500 feet below the surface.
At first, the marine engineers had no idea what they were looking at. They weren't trained in archaeology, so these structures on the bottom of the ocean seemed bizarre to them and that they shouldn't exist at all. It can be difficult to understand what's shown on sonar images. The white area in the center represents the path the boat takes above the water, which is sending down sonar pulses to the bottom of the ocean at a sideways angle. This is called side-scan sonar, which creates an effect that looks like light hitting objects. The most iconic of these objects, shown in the sonar images, appears to closely resemble features of the Mayan and Aztec step pyramids, such as the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. In front of the pyramid-like feature, we find what appears to be the remnants of temple walls, aligned perpendicular to the pyramid, but largely buried by sand. Nearby to the large pyramid, we also find highly enigmatic structures with step-like features that suggest they may be smaller temples out in front of the pyramid. One thing is for sure though, these objects would be impossible to be created by nature. Subsequently, they realized that they had potentially discovered an underwater civilization. Fearing that discovery and how it might look on them as being academics, they kept it quiet.
They're confronted with this massive complex. It's like 7 square miles and features what appears to be Mayan-style pyramids with long walls and very definite compartmentalized structures. And they're almost terrified by what they're seeing, because how could this possibly be? How can this city be existing 2,000 feet underneath the surface of the water? How did it get there? How old could it possibly be? All of these questions start to open up.
Now, this really caused a sensation. There were kind of 3D models made of it, which looked amazingly like pyramids. But something was down there, because they've been scanning the whole area and really found nothing else that looked like this organized, almost like city-like scape at the bottom of the sea.
Now, the evidence for this lost city was sonar images that looked incredibly impressive. And these interested a number of parties, including National Geographic Society, were willing to fund further exploration. And what we needed was more evidence of what was down there. And eventually, ADC Communications sent down an ROV, a remote operating video camera. Aside from Nat Geo, the Cuban Academy of Sciences also became involved with it. They were incredibly intrigued, and they sent one of their leading geologists to get involved. His name was Manuel Uterard, and he was actually present when the remote operated video cameras were sent down 2,000 feet to try and get this valuable evidence of exactly what was down there. The geometrical forms were suggestive very strongly that we were dealing with artificial, let's say, human-made structure. And they were able to see some of these stone blocks, and on a couple of them it actually even looked as if there may be a few markings on them, maybe even glyphs. But the problem is that you are so deep at 2,000 feet that you have what they refer to as snow around you all the time. This is like material debris that just gets swept through the currents. It looks like it's snowing all the time. And it just completely messed up the images that were being sent back to the surface. And when these were seen by Nat Geo and by Random House, they just thought, this is just not enough. This is not enough for us to put our money into this. If you can come up with better evidence, then, you know, the deal's back on the table. But for the moment, we're out. And unfortunately, ADC Communications did not have that money. So whatever is down there remains there today. We still don't know exactly what is there. It could be Atlantis.
After the initial flurry of the excitement of the discovery in 2001, there were major promises that were made by the Cuban government and others that, oh yeah, we'll have a all-hands-on-deck exploration. We're going to get to the bottom of this, what's going on out here off the coast of Cuba. Then nothing happens.
They announced it on BBC News, and you know that something's like official when it's on BBC News. And then what was interesting was it disappeared off the BBC News website pretty quickly. And it's just a weird reaction to it, because you think, hey, you find these structures, surely the entire world will stop what they're doing and send diving teams down, and we're going to have CNN and we're going to have everything on this. And the reaction to it was weird, and that's what sparked my interest in it. The fact that it sort of popped up, disappeared, got hushed, and it hasn't fully been explored since.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do believe that there's a sort of a big sort of conspiracy of silence around this, because it would literally upturn the entire events around the Younger Dryas and the story that the Maya said, yes, we inherited this whole thing from somebody else, and here's the exact date.
There's a tendency among mainstream archaeology to dismiss the idea that there was a global flood, a global cataclysm. Even though it's talked about in dozens of civilizations all over the world, modern archaeology says, no, it didn't happen. So if they're confronted with evidence of a lost civilization, that is very challenging to mainstream archaeology. We need a paradigm shift here. And perhaps an exploration such as this off the coast of Cuba will lead to that paradigm shift.
If this is an ancient city complex that has been discovered, and mainstream science agrees that there wasn't a flood, could this discovery present powerful enough evidence to rewrite the historical record and alter the mainstream timeline of civilization? As the mysteries and teachings of many ancient traditions echo through Mesoamerica, the question remains: who provided the ancestral knowledge to these powerful civilizations?
If you would like to see more from Gaia's Ancient Civilization series, follow the links in the description or visit our Gaia portal at gaia.com/fifthkind.